Yalimath, everyone. My name is Ali Shivji, and I am the Honorary Secretary for the Aga Khan Economic Planning Board for Canada. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on Alberta's economic outlook, understanding today's reality and tomorrow's potential. This is the first webinar in a series on understanding Alberta's limitless potential, where we will be exploring 1. An update on the economy and sectors affected by the pandemic in Alberta. 2. The impact on business owners and the various support initiatives available within the institutions. And 3, opportunities in the Alberta economy and how we can position ourselves for success. Before we begin, I want to just start with a disclaimer. All the discussions during the course of this webinar and future webinars are the views and opinions of the speakers themselves and do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers or affiliates. And the information provided does not constitute financial, legal, tax, or investment recommendations or advice. So let's get started. I'm so excited and we are so privileged to have 3 incredible speakers with us today. The first is Ali Sumar, the Senior Vice President at ATB Financial, President Zara Somani, who is the President of the Council for Edmonton, and President Fauzia Lalani Kodabaksh, who is the President of the Council for Prairies. These 3 panelists and esteemed ones are ones that we're very excited to engage in this very important topic today. So let me start by introducing Ali Sumar. Ali Sumar is a Senior Vice President and Head of Markets for Retail at ATB Financial. For 20 years, Ali has worked in various customer service and leadership roles, including being the Senior Vice President and Treasurer. Ali is currently a board member of Art Gallery of Alberta, and he holds a Bachelor of Economics degree from the University of Calgary, an MBA in Financial Services from Dalhousie, and because he has a whole ton of spare time, he's currently completing his doctorate of Business Administration at the University of Calgary. Ali was also a key member in our EPB and Council for Canada COVID Economic Response Task Force, where he specifically focused on Alberta and played an instrumental role in looking at timely information that helped us prepare the Jamaat during the pandemic that surged, that we continue to be in, but also in the past year. I want to next introduce President of the Ismaili Council for Edmonton, President Zara Somani. So President Zara has over 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur. She's the chair of the Edmonton Community Foundation, a member of the Peter Lougheed Leadership College Advisory Council, a member of the Dean's Business Advisory Council of the University of Alberta, a member of the executive chapter of the Institute of Corporate Directors in Edmonton. She's also been a director of many boards and institutions across Alberta. And finally, but absolutely not the least at all, President of the Ismaili Council for Prairies, Fauzia Lalani Kodabaksh. President Fauzia has been and is a senior business leader in many walks of life. To start off with, she's currently a senior business leader working with Suncor Energy Inc. She's formerly the Vice President of Technology and Operations at TELUS, and formerly the President and Chief Executive Officer of Aquila Capital, a Calgary-based Venture 100 energy company. President Lalani has served on several boards, including as chairman of the CRA, or the Canada Revenue Agency, and the Workers' Compensation Board of Alberta. President Lalani has also served previously on boards for Stars Air Ambulance, the Calgary YMCA, and she currently sits on the Calgary Stampede Foundation Board, as well as the University of Calgary Board. She's a recipient of the 50 Key Women in Energy Award in the leadership category, and the Stevie International Business Award for the Best Support Team. So with that, let's get into the content of today's webinar. Let's start with a little bit of context setting. Alberta, our home province for the 4 of us, has been one of the hardest hit provinces in Canada during this pandemic. And it's been because we faced both a downturn in the economy as well as the pandemic, and at the exact same time. There are 3 specific areas that Ali Sumar is going to be talking today that I think are really important for all of us to really focus in on. The first is this idea of the status of the current economic climate in Alberta. The second is that there are around the specific sectors that have been impacted And third is, what are these areas of opportunity? What are some of the bright spots? What are some of the ways that we can truly take advantage of this and leverage Hazimam's, Dalika, and Alberta's guidance around saying, how do we prepare ourselves to rebound and prepare for the future? We're also going to get to hear from both presidents of the Prairies and Edmonton councils on specific initiatives that have been launched by the institutions to help support the Jamaat and to hold the hands of the Jamaat as we navigate these uncertain times. And lastly, we're going to spend some time, and some of the context revolves around what we affectionately call internally as CERT, or the COVID Economic Response Task Force. The CERT task force was something that was commissioned by the Council for Canada earlier this year, and actually earlier last year during the pandemic, to bring together experts within the institutions and outside to look at specific areas of the economy across the country and look at ways in which the country itself and the Jamaat itself can rebound effectively. And Ali, as a member of that, myself and others as members of this task force, will hopefully be able to highlight some of those findings and point you to some of the stuff that currently exists on our website in order to do that. So with that, I'd like to jump right into the state of Alberta economy. And I'd like Ali to start with you. Can you take us through a little bit around what in your mind is the status of the current economy in Alberta, and where would you see is kind of like the outlook for the economy in 2021?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ellie. So it's a tough time to be in Alberta, to be very honest. Alberta, for a number of years has been quite a prosperous province, and we were hit very, very hard, both with COVID-19 and the lockdowns it caused, in addition to a significant reduction in oil demand. And the large spike that we had with COVID cases in the autumn forced a really stringent lockdown. And so we did have the most working hours lost of any province. And we did also have, nearly a 20% employment change peak to trough, that we talked about in the CERT results. So Alberta's been hit very, very hard with the COVID-19 pandemic and the oil price shock, which has further exacerbated things. Mixed news there is the economy seems to have found a floor. So we do have a phased reopening happening in Alberta right now. Oil and gas prices, are trending higher, even higher than we thought they might be. However, it will take, economists are estimating, till about 2023 to reverse the drop in productivity that Alberta experienced from COVID and the oil price shock. Some other green shoots are unemployment is slowly dropping. It's down to 10.7% unemployment in Alberta from 11.1. But again, that is still a bit higher than the national average of 9.4%. There should be, again, a recovery in the third quarter of 2021. But one of the things to keep in mind is because we fell so much during this pandemic, as the economy starts to open up and jobs will be recreated. For Alberta, it's going to likely feel like we're trailing a lot of the other provinces in getting back to a normal, so to speak. And in fact, it could be a couple of years before we have a really, what feels like a recovery. And a lot of that's due to the fact that because Albertans were hit so hard, there isn't as much household savings in Alberta versus the other provinces through this pandemic. And so spending that will occur when restrictions lift will also be muted compared to the other provinces. And, that really leads me to most economists are expecting this to be a K-shaped recovery. And what they mean by that is going into COVID, there was a normal, so to speak, of what we thought of when it came to jobs in the economy. But coming out of it, there is significantly, or there's expected to be significant change in industries that are going to really benefit coming out of the pandemic. Industries like healthcare, technology, trends that were starting will likely be sped up. But there's also going to be a tremendous number of jobs that and industries that take a long time to bounce back around, manufacturing, commercial real estate, the tourism pieces and conferences and such with hospitality. So there's going to be a number of jobs that do take some time to come back, and some may not even come back in the same form as they were before. And so that's just a high level update there, Ellie.
So Ali, I mean, really helpful, and it's helpful for you to kind of point out this idea of Alberta that might be a bit slower when it comes to the rebound than other parts of the country. When you think a little bit about that, could we then dive a little bit more into this idea of what sectors do you think have truly been negatively impacted by the pandemic? What are some of the new realities that the Jamaat is going to be facing around this? Because I do feel, particularly from the Economic Planning Board perspective, that we've seen that some of the government subsidies and some of the other parts, particularly in Alberta, have masked what is the true reality. And so, where would you see the new reality for the Jamaat?
Yeah, that's thank you for that question, Ali. So I think, to state the obvious, our oil and gas industry is going to face a lot of headwinds. We've seen a number of consolidations already happen in the industry, and there seem to be becoming more commonplace. But in addition to that, Alberta was attracting a lot of investment, for quite some time externally, and coming, both with Canada's climate accord targets with the Paris Accord, in addition to what happened with the relative carbon footprint of Alberta's energy economy, there isn't that new investment coming in. So we're going to continue to, I think, see consolidation, even if oil prices and gas prices remain high. And that does mean that, some very both high-paying jobs like engineering jobs specific to the industry and other jobs that played supporting roles in the industry, a lot of those jobs may not come back the way that they were before. There's also additional headwinds to Canada's energy industry around Line 5 that runs through the United States, and the potential impacts of that. And a few other items around transporting our energy out. But in addition to the energy industry, there's also manufacturing that's been significantly impacted in Alberta negatively. And in particular, you want to really call out the accommodation sector, commercial real estate. Downtown Calgary vacancies are hovering around 30%. So there is going to be probably a permanent change in how this affects leisure and travel venues, in particular how it affects office jobs, the jobs that were really supporting the day-to-day office footprint, like administrative jobs and such. Some of those jobs may not come back, as a good chunk of the economy at least is going to start working remotely part-time, if not full-time. And so there is going to be a significant amount of impacts in energy, in particular in leisure and travel and tourism venues for conferences, and then also commercial real estate and manufacturing.
Well, that's helpful, Lee. And I think I know that it's not all negative, and I'd like to come back a little bit later in the webinar today and maybe push a little bit harder on where are some of the great opportunities, because there are many people who say you never want to waste a good crisis for for finding opportunities. And I think with that, I'd like to pivot a little bit onto this idea of businesses and how do we help businesses think a little bit about how they're going to pivot and how to think about this. And we'll also then touch on professionals as well and how we think about that. And so with that, I'd like to, President Zara, maybe I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. And knowing that as president of the Edmonton Council, but also as a business owner yourself, what advice can you give to entrepreneurs in the Jamaat during this time, and particularly in Alberta?
Thanks, Ali. I mean, there's no doubt this past year has been really difficult for everyone. And we've seen a significant impact for members of our Jamaat that are business leaders in key industries, specifically industries like retail, hospitality, oil and gas, etc. I want to say and try to be a little bit more optimistic here and say that, entrepreneurs thrive on identifying needs, finding solutions, and solving problems. So the question really here, as difficult as it may seem, is important for us to continue to maintain a mindset of resilience, optimism, survival, and growth.
So Zara, I absolutely agree. As an entrepreneur myself too, I feel like we thrive, in some of these crisis opportunities. But if we can get a little bit more granular, like what are some recommendations you have about how we can do that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot that we can do, and it can be overwhelming. There's three areas that I would really want to focus on today. The first being pandemic support programs. Second, creating a personal network, and third is really the opportunity to learn and grow. I mean, look, we're really fortunate in Canada. We have the benefit of many pandemic support programs, both for employers and for employees. And these support programs, they continue to be offered and refined even until today for income support, rent, education, and in Alberta, even for innovation. So I would say take advantage of these programs. These funds can be used not just for the short-term liquidity and survival, but also to provide us with the resources that are necessary to undertake transformations in our business to help us to succeed into the future. Secondly, and I think that this is really important, is creating a personal network of support. Business leaders often feel very alone in their journey, but we are not alone. And what we're going through is similar to many others in different industries. And it's really important to network. So networking can happen peer-to-peer within the Jamaat. It can happen through our EPB Alliance network, and even externally through organizations like YPO, EO, the Chamber of Commerce, or any other organization that your industry might be affiliated with. My experience in these forums is really that they've allowed for opportunities for me to see how others are responding, to get acquainted with challenges that other industries are facing that are similar to the ones that we're going through, and also stimulating ideas for diversification and growth. The third area, this opportunity to innovate and learn, we hear so much about that. And I'm sure that you can agree with me that webinar after webinar can be overwhelming. I almost feel like we're in this state of information overload. And the big question that I think we need to kind of take a step back and ask ourselves is, how do we decipher all of this information and make it relevant to our business today? And the big question that I would challenge entrepreneurs in the Jamaat to ask their boards or their management teams, what is our value proposition, and is it still relevant today? Or are there changes that we need to make? And it's really important that we think about cultivating this corporate culture to embrace change, to give our teams a sense of purpose. And then, the most difficult question of all is this an opportunity to scale up, or should we really think about scaling back and diversifying?
Yeah, it's such incredible, like I think we could spend like 17 hours on just the topics you talked about there. And absolutely, they are so important. And maybe it'd be helpful to dive a little bit and saying, okay, so let's say, for instance, I'm an entrepreneur in the Jamaat. I'm a business owner in the Jamaat. All 3 points you've talked about, the pandemic support, the network, the opportunity to learn and grow, all things that I want to do. I don't know where to start. What support services would you say are available, that have been made available to business owners in the Jamaat? How do I engage with those things, and how would you describe them?
Well, Ali, I think that first of all, EPB has done an incredible job of supporting the business owners in the Jamaat by providing resources that are available to help the Jamaat understand the disruption that we're experiencing, to support business continuity, and also positioning our business to thrive in the new normal. So in terms of helping the Jamaat to understand the disruption we're experiencing, it's really nice to see how EPB has connected with leading economists and business leaders to help us make sense of the state of our economy, not just in Alberta and across Canada, but also internationally. And today is a prime example of that. These webinars are recorded. They're available for us on the II Canada website. The other aspect of ensuring business continuity, and we talked about this in terms of pandemic supports, On the business service page of the II Canada website, each region has uploaded a comprehensive database of external agency resources and supports. I highly recommend checking these out and ensuring that we've taken advantage of all the supports that are available. And now talking about positioning our business to thrive in the new normal, EPB continues to offer webinars and access to short courses. I think that in this time, access to capital is really important. We may have our own networks to do so, but I know that through the alliances, EPB has also made significant relationships for us to be able to leverage. And I want to talk about a little bit about the Future Ready initiative, where we're aiming to provide mentorship, research on industry trends, and information on all of these short courses, workshops, boot camps, micro-credentials, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, you know, especially in Alberta, we really need to think about digitization. We need to think about data analytics, our corporate culture, which we talked about earlier, AI, which is really important to Alberta, and the work that the universities in Alberta are doing to help us to increase our efficiencies and expand our market share.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think it's so helpful to think about, because you're right, there are many resources and many things that we want to do, and I know the EPB team across the country has really worked hard at doing that. I know that we've provided a couple of links, and then we will be providing links throughout this throughout the webinar, but also at the end of it, so that people can actually go to that and find some of those aspects throughout that, for sure. Okay, that's really helpful from a business perspective. Let's then shift over to professionals. And President Fauzi, I'd love to kind of engage you on this topic a little bit. You know, many members of the Jamaat are professionals, you know, particularly in Alberta. They're working in areas from engineering to trades. And what type of advice do you have for them about how they can start to navigate, well, not start, but how they can continue to navigate this pandemic and where we are in Alberta, but also to position themselves for success in the future?
Thank you, Ali, for that question. Look, as Ali Sumar started off, I want to acknowledge that it has been a number of difficult years for Alberta, and as Ali and President Zara and you all also mentioned, we are driven by the oil and gas, or the commodities business, if you like, and it's not just Calgary, as well as Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Having said all of that, I think the economy, because it, if you like, quote unquote, tanked the worst, also has the most opportunity and poised for the highest growth and recovery. Might be a bit slower than any of us would like, but I think we are poised for that. So what can we do? Well, I think we've talked about this already, but first and foremost, there's the Future of Work website, and it's an incredible initiative that the institutions have put forth, which takes a very holistic look at all areas of professionals, businesses, trades, you name it. And so I encourage all of you to go there. I think you already heard about the Fast Track Mentorship Program, which really is at an individual level, where you can go deep with someone that you trust that can help you navigate through all of this. And we've heard you use this word, I think, a couple of times already, and I would suggest it's one of the words from 2020, which is going to go into 2021, and that's pivot. Pivot and be open to seize opportunities versus looking for a perfect job, which is difficult to hear, because we all have our aspirations, and we should have aspirations, but sometimes there's more than one way to get to where you want to go to. So some things that perhaps we can think about. Ali, thank you.
No, and President Fauzi, that's such relevant words. When we think a little bit about this idea of pivoting, can you give us some examples that you've seen? Like, when, you know, what I've definitely found is we speak to people, say, oh, other people can pivot, it's not applicable to me.
Yeah.
And are there some interesting examples where you've seen people pivot that maybe they wouldn't have thought about, others wouldn't have thought about, and yet they've been able to be successful, or that you've seen some great examples of that may be worth highlighting right now?
Great question. And I'm going to refer to a few things that you've already heard in this webinar. When we think about the traditional jobs, if you like, in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, the first thing that people think of is oil and gas. Pivoting doesn't mean that you have to give up what you're passionate about, but it's the industries that you look at is one way to pivot. Another way to pivot is to look at the skills that you have. As an example, we've heard that there are at least 2,000 to 4,000 vacancies in the coding world. And that applies to all kinds of industries. So how can you take something that you're good at, whether you're an engineer or if you're in computer science or something like that, that you can take some quick courses that allow you to pivot, as we've said. Other ways to, if you like to think about it, is what industry. So we've already heard Ali Sumar talk a little bit about it, and there is supposed to be digital transformation in the 18 point, some odd billion dollars that is set to take place. So how do we start to think about that, and what are some of those careers that they're going to require? And then last but not least, I'm going to add that networking is critical. And networking is about, maybe volunteering in your industry association, whether you're in trades or in professionals or any other. And you're going to meet people, you're going to hear about things that you will never hear in other places. And I think we've heard that at least half the jobs are never actually posted. And these are the opportunities where you'll hear about something that'll give you an idea to pivot. I hope that's helpful.
No, that's really helpful, and it's a good. It reminds me to make sure that we do a couple of shout outs here. One is the Fast Track Mentorship Program. I know that we've had, the first version of which has gone out, but it will be open again at certain points in time in the future for people to sign up on. And another program is one that EPB has been specifically working on around what we call open doors, which is this ability to have members of the Jamaat create kind of networking opportunities for them within specific sectors, specific areas, and just create those opportunities to engage. But that we need to do that, and there's already been some great success, particularly with Prairies in the Edmonton the regions actually leading the pace across the country, in Ontario as well. But some really exciting things coming up from there. And I think this idea of exciting is an important part. When I've talked to mentors or interviewed people who are very successful, and you talk about like when are their periods of biggest success, they've talked about the downturns, right? As President Fazio, you mentioned, that is the time that they invested the most, they really were able to then capitalize upon. And so I'd like to focus a little bit on the brighter spots, and for us to say, okay, look, we're in the downturn. As Ali Sumar said earlier, we've kind of hit a bottom. So hopefully it doesn't get much worse, and we kind of know that. So now it's all up. How do we think about that? And so let's get into some of these bright spots. And Ali, maybe we jump back to you to say, look, what are some of the bright spots? What are some of the opportunities that Albertans can look forward to our Jamaati members can look forward to, and that we can start to think about as people start to prepare themselves for what's coming next?
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I would say President Zara and President Fazio covered a lot of these things, I thought, really well around where we're headed, some of the economies that are going to be created, and what it means for us. And just from a higher level overview, Alberta, per capita has been the most prosperous province in Canada for quite some time, and I don't think that was by accident. We have the youngest population in Canada. We have a very skilled labor force. Up until recently, we had the most amount of trades jobs created in Alberta. We have high levels of private sector investment, abundant natural resources, and you start to see that Alberta innovation and entrepreneurial mindset really come through even during the pandemic. We've had 10,000 businesses start up during the pandemic. We have oil prices, as I mentioned, have recovered, and that should provide for a good drilling season in the autumn. Oil production has increased, and even though we weren't able to ship a lot of our product out through the Keystone Pipeline, which has been stopped, Alberta exports for oil are at all-time highs right now using other methods such as rail. So that doesn't seem to have slowed us down either. You know, an important agricultural crop for Alberta is canola. Canola prices are at 13-year highs, and they're a third higher export-wise than they were last year. And you know, to again further leverage what President Fauzi and President Zara said, we are noticing a lot more jobs being created in the tech world here. So we have tech startups expanding in Alberta, and you have a bridge of how we got here and where we're going really start to come into focus in the tech sector. You have tech sector jobs that help assess, measure, lower carbon use and emissions. Those are being headquartered in Alberta. Greenhouse gas capture pipelines and the technology associated, really gaining steam in Alberta. You have Canada's Protein Supercluster and the National Institute of Nanotechnology located in Alberta. You have agricultural technology, you know, which is expected to create billions of new dollars in investment over the coming years, along with thousands of jobs. That's located for the entire country in Alberta. And, you know, it's you know, that's just at a high level. I can talk a little bit more if you'd like, but that's just at a high level where we're starting, and there's still a lot more to go as our economy does transition. And I love the word that the president's used, pivot, as the economy pivots to a new normal. A lot of the know-how and a lot of the entrepreneurial mindset that got us here, I think is not a liability, but in fact, a big advantage in if we can retool our skills, you know, really adapting to the new normal and accelerating Alberta's growth.
Yeah, no, I think that's so much to unpack there, and I want to be conscious of time because I know we have a bunch of questions that are already starting to pop up that we want to answer. But maybe, Ali, if you had advice for a Jamaati member who's wanting to learn about these areas, it's the first time they've heard about the context of a supercluster, or you know, that they hear about some of these new sectors and new jobs and commodity prices, but feel like it's still very foreign to them. You have any thoughts on like where, and maybe I'll actually open this up to all three of you in terms of like what do we do about this? Like where do people go to get this information? Because I feel like I want this to be practical. I want people to walk away from this webinar saying, yes, I can actually do something here, or I can go there, and would love your thoughts on that. So maybe Ali, I'll start with you, and I see some heads in the audience, so I'll probably go to the other panelists too, just to see if they have any other thoughts there.
Yeah, I know we'll probably talk to some resources that we've created within the community, but you know, a lot of current economics reports, a lot of just reading through job openings, reading through new industries being created. Alberta media, especially where we are creating new jobs, there's a lot of attention every time we have a new industry that's spinning up and such. There is, you know, there's a lot of positive media attention being given to it. And so I would, you know, stay abreast of what you see in the media. And I also want to just take a quick opportunity to just focus in on something that the president said around networks and the importance of that in really understanding where we're growing and where the jobs are going to be created. As I think quite rightly mentioned, a lot of these jobs may not be publicized, and some of these new opportunities and the skill sets you might need might not be publicized, but they come as a function of network. And those networks do really have to change. If you're looking for a job for the future, you're probably going to need a different network than the network you have today. And so establishing a new network is I think really important. And I turn it over to President Zara or President Fauzi for more.
President Zara, I guess I'll start with you, and then I'll come to President Fauzi if there's anything else you wanted to add here.
Thanks, Ali. I would say that I agree with everything that's been said, and that, you know, it's really important to ask questions. You know, what really excites us, and then to sort of go on a fact-finding mission. We could, you know, approach academic institutions, because this is what they're really doing. NAIT, SAIT, you look at University of Alberta and Calgary. These institutions are really catering to jobs of the future. And for entrepreneurs, I think that if we're able to create networks, to ask questions, and to see where we fit within those trajectories, it's quite exciting, actually.
President Fauzi, anything to add there?
Yeah, maybe the only thing I would add, I think those are great comments, is a notion that somebody introduced me to a while ago. And I have to tell you, I was quite frustrated when I first heard about it. So I expect some of you might get frustrated, but it is super important. And this is the notion of personal brand. It's taking that time to say, okay, what is important to me? And what are the things that I'm good at? And being really honest and saying, where are things that I can learn? And then kind of building on that, there's an entire area that is dedicated to Future Ready Initiative, which I'm hoping everybody has heard about on Friday Night Reflections. There's so many ideas there that you can go in, and if you need help, it also tells you, how you can do that. And I guess as a past EPB chair, I have to put in a plug for all the networks that EPB itself has created, including one on LinkedIn. And I think this speaks really well to what Ali Sumar said: is we need to think differently about our networks. I hope some of those things are helpful. Ali, thank you.
No, those are great. I mean, this idea, one of the personal brand, I haven't heard it that way, but I'm not offended. I'm excited by what you just brought up, because I'm like, oh, that's such an interesting point. Like, how many of us have taken the time to step back and say, well, what is our personal brand? How do we define it? Because I remember one of my mentors once telling me that, and it just clicked right now as you said that, this idea of saying that your brand isn't where you work and what your educational background is. The brand is what you decide of it. Are you going to make it a personal brand, or are you going to make it based upon, the career you've had? And I do think that in the world we're going to now, it is really important that we think about our personal brands. The other thing I would just say is that, to your point, one, we have an EPB newsletter that goes out now on a weekly basis with weekly opportunities, on a monthly basis with a lot of very relevant information. So I'll ask the team to just post the link in terms of how you can sign up for that newsletter in the chat so people can grab that. And then we also do have, as you mentioned, President Fazia, we have a LinkedIn channel specifically for business professionals, as well as an overall EPB LinkedIn area. These are one of the many platforms that we've created for people to network and engage with. So, if people haven't already signed up for those, they should, as it'll be a really important, an important part for people to think about. I'm just starting to monitor questions, and I'm going to start to kind of go into a couple of questions, if I may. And I think the next one seems to be quite appropriate, based on we're talking about brand and careers for those who are in careers. What happens if I'm a student? What happens if I'm just like, some people, I've talked to a couple of students who are so scared right now. They're like, I'm in school and I'm going to come in the world. What does that look like? And President Zara, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, I've completed my undergraduate degree. What advice would you have for me? Like, what do I do in this period of time? Is this an opportunity? Should I be scared? Should I be excited? Like, how do I think about this?
Thanks, Ali. I think that you should be excited and scared at the same time. No matter what field that you're in or you're graduating from, I would say that we all need to be entrepreneurial in our thinking. And what that really means to me, anyway, is to really have a vision of what's important to you. Where do you want to be in the next 5 or 10 years within your field? Again, I go back to asking questions because that's the only way we can see, we can find out, what we don't know. And then, for every student, I would say, it's really important, just like we have in our business, to have a strategic plan and to test it and to review it yearly. My favorite time to review my plan is on New Year's Day in the morning when everyone's still asleep. Is a really good time where I sort of think about, what did we achieve? What do we really need to work on? Are we still on track, in terms of our expectations? And I think that if you have a plan, then, I can share my favorite quote with you is the harder you work at it, the luckier you're going to get.
I like that. I'm frantically taking notes here as you go through that. I often think one of my mentors once said to me that you can try as hard as you want to. If you use a hockey analogy, Alberta is very relevant to hockey in this context. Like you can try to shoot on the net, and you're never going to know if you're going to get the goal. I think that's in my mind. I feel like it's in the hands of higher than me. But where you shoot from, well, that's the preparation you can do. And you can be shooting from the far end, or you can get as close as you can to the net before you shoot. And I think that's the preparation work that is important for us to do. And then, the luck and the blessings, or however you want to look at it, comes post that. But you still have to set yourself up, because if you don't, you're not in the right place. So I think that's a very helpful thing to think about. President Fawzia, can I jump to you for a second? There's a question here around this idea of, okay, we've talked about financial support, right? And sometimes that almost gets too much focus. What about other areas of support for the Jamaat that are not just finance during these periods of time? Because these truly are and do seem to be like very important times. But how do we think about those in a greater context?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question, Ali. As I think all of us have mentioned, let's not sugarcoat. It's been a really difficult period for so many of us and the Jamaat. I don't think any of us thought that we'd be cooped up with our families as much as we love them for extended periods of time. Some of us have gotten used to going out, getting fresh air, all of those things, and that's not the world that we're living in. I'm going to put, a plug in again for something I said earlier, which is the Future Ready initiative, because it's way broader than helping folks with their careers. There's areas there where we've got clinical practitioners, social workers who are there to help the Jamaat. So there is a lot there, and I think President Zara said it really well, that sometimes that in itself can become overwhelming. So here's the one thing that I'd like you to do and write down if you can, and I think we can even post the number again in the chat function, which is the access line. If you're not sure, call the access line. There'll be somebody there who will be able to help you, whether it's you or your loved one needs some support from a mental health perspective, or if you're struggling with your child in terms of education and you need a tutor or some ideas on how you get them help. Those are just a couple of the things that come to mind. I could go on, but I hope that gives you some idea. Remember access, and please make sure that you call when you need help.
Yeah, they've just put up the access line number here, and I think it's a really important reminder. A lot of members of the Jamaat, business owners, others have said, "Oh, well, the access line is not for me. I don't need that type of help." And I think it's a really good point, President Fawzia, to remind the Jamaat this is not about that type of help or this type of help. The access line is just an opportunity for you to speak to a central group of Jamaati members who are here to help in anything that you have questions for. It's almost like the eye care desk that I think our Edmonton brothers and sisters started and then went across the country. It's the effective think of the eye care desk. It's just in a virtual context, and even if you need someone to tell you a joke, call the access line. Let them make you happy, right? But take the opportunity to do that, because by not doing that, by not taking the time to call, by not taking the time to realize that you're not alone, you are inadvertently affecting yourself and everyone around you, because you didn't take the time to say, hey, they're members of Jamaat that can help. And I know on previous EPB webinars, we've challenged the Jamaat to say, call the access line and ask us a question that we can't answer. Test us out, and really put us to the test, because we've delivered groceries. We've made sure people have had meals. We've helped people on mental health breaks. We've showed them resources. We've found child daycare supports. Like there is nothing that the Jamaat cannot do, and the access line and during the pandemic has been an incredible opportunity to watch our Jamaats do some incredible work. So test us, push us, but let us do that, and call us and let us engage with you, because we'd really like to do that. We're going to start posting, as we're going through the rest of the questions, we're going to start posting different links in the chat so that you can start to see them. There'll be links on the EPB landing page. We're going to send you some links on specific areas of resources for financial planning, as we have a whole wealth of resources around financial planning, both in terms of courses you can take, free courses like ones from McGill University, or courses through an organization that we have an official partnership with called the Knowledge for Financial Education, what we call COFFEE. We're going to post links on business supports, and specifically both within our Jamaati context, but also a really, really handy website that the Government of Canada has around business supports. And we're also going to post a link on our CERT slides, or the COVID Economic Response Task Force findings, which on our website, on the II Canada website, has specific information about different areas of focus and different industries that Jamaat can focus on. And so we'll start to just throw out those links in the chat as we're going through here, just for Jamaati members to see. I want to come back for a second. You know, this has been an exciting week in Alberta. Last week, the government of Alberta kind of launched, or I guess launched is not the right word, but they released the new budget. There's a lot of different parts of the budget. There are some difficult parts about how much money and how much debt we're going into in other parts, but there's also a lot about the innovation parts and what's happening there. This week, there was the big announcement in Calgary about new jobs coming to the city and different things from that perspective. So it's not all doom and gloom. The budget itself, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes on this. And I know that some of these will still be unpacked in the coming weeks, but Ali, do you have any kind of high level thoughts or areas that the Jamaat should be aware of the recent kind of Alberta budget, even if it's just enough for them to say, okay, I should go and pay more attention to that?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. So as you mentioned, the province did release their new budget forecast for 21, and it does have a lot of red ink in it, but part of this does come from, you know, the fact that the province knows that there needs to be a lot of spending to be put forth to get us out of the pandemic, and now's not the time to start cutting access to services or access to health. And so that was a big priority. Probably the biggest priority in the budget was what was going to happen with health and pandemic response. But following very closely to that, and this is noteworthy because it is, in my opinion, a change in tone from what we've seen in the past, was the highlights on economic development, you know, particularly billions of dollars being spent so that they say Albertans have a competitive edge as the economy reopens, growth restarts, and opportunities reappear. And you know, this is a different, in my opinion, a different change when you're spending billions of dollars that you're borrowing to move the economy forward in new ways. And that really does come around new investments being put into technology and innovation and climate change initiatives. There's a tourism recovery plan, an aviation and logistics strategy, pharmaceutical strategy, strategies for the finance sector, agriculture, and then they talk a bit about investments for key areas like manufacturing and general labor and talent growth, and retraining skilled labor. So a lot in there, and certainly, a high-level commitment to spend what's needed to help transform Alberta's economy. Again, with the knowledge that some jobs that we came into may not exist anymore, and so there does need to be significant investments made, irrespective of Alberta's fiscal position in pivoting our workforce.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. President Zar, President Fawzia, any additional stuff on the budget that you wanted to add in before we go on to the next part? Okay. Yeah, look, I think that there's a lot there, and we've had a lot of great kind of different topics here that we've talked about today, right? We've talked about this idea of one, the Alberta economy itself will be slower to recover than others, but there's still highlights of opportunity. We've talked about this idea of like entrepreneurs thriving and how we think through this idea, and I'll let President Zar in her closing remarks talk a little bit more about that, summarizing, but this idea of the pandemic support, the network, the learning and growing, and ultimately that you're not alone. President Fawzia re-emphasized this word that is so important around pivoting and thinking about, you don't have to give up your passions. You have to just think about them in different ways. And that if you take some time to really think about what you're good at, you can really get there. The idea of networks, the fact that, as a Jamaat, we have so many resources, be it our website, the links that we've sent out to you, as well as this idea of proactiveness in your personal brand. And also we talked about FRI, the Future Ready Initiative, which is more and more information is coming out about this, and the Jamaat should really catch that. Ultimately, and then for students, have a vision. Like don't give up, but look at this as a great opportunity. A ton that we've covered, and I want to actually give each of the panelists maybe just a couple minutes to do some closing remarks and make sure that they've covered off part. And maybe Ali, I'm going to throw it back to you just on this idea of like maybe summarizing your points and talking a little bit about this proactiveness that people should think about as they approach this. And then President Zara, President Fawzi, I'll come to each of you just for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. So, you know, one of the things, just looking through the current publications that have come out globally, you know, from different consultancies and different areas on, you know, what's the future workforce going to look like? You know, they're expecting that workforce shift, as we kind of talked about, is also going to be a bit K-shaped. You know, the investment in medical care and personal care, you know, is going to be substantial. That wasn't one that we were sure what was going to happen with, but coming out of the pandemic, that seems to be something that a lot of governments are going to invest in. There's an estimate that about 20% of business travel won't return long term, and so that, you know, while we might have accommodation sectors and such that, you know, I hope make a really stout recovery, you know, things like conferences and such are expected to be muted as people don't see the need to gather in such large scale as they did pre-pandemic. And, you know, really to call it out here, a quarter of jobs are expected to be displaced coming out of the pandemic by 2030. You know, in particular, physical and manual skills jobs, office support and retail jobs we talked about, and there's going to be, you know, an increase in jobs around the STEM space, growth in creative and arts management roles, and really a focus on skills versus just degrees. And also oil, you know, we are moving to the Paris Accord targets, but oil does seem to be necessary as a source of energy in our lifetime at least. And so while there's going to be a shift, oil I don't think is going extinct anytime soon in terms of its need as an energy source. And, you know, just to close with some positivity here on my end, like I want to call out that Alberta is starting to shift this way as well. So all the things I just talked about, you know, Alberta is already third in Canada for renewable energy and installed wind energy capacity. You know, some people are guessing that Alberta by 2025 or a bit later could be a utility leader in wind and solar energy. Vanadium and lithium that we have in our brine from oil operations can be used in electric car batteries. Asphaltenes and bitumen that we have in heavy oil can be used for carbon fiber, which actually generates even more. So while we've had these legacy industries that have got us here, the know-how and how these industries got us here, there is a pivot technology-wise and know-how-wise, but a big opportunity for Alberta, I think, in the future, and for the Jamaat in the future.
Oh, that's really exciting. President Zara, some final thoughts from you?
Thanks, Ali. And just building on what Ali was talking about in terms of, you know, enabling this growth mindset and optimism. You know, I'd just like to emphasize that in our Jamaat in particular, we're very fortunate in Alberta. We have a very young and vibrant Jamaat. And, you know, as we heard today, you know, our government's trying to support economic growth, particularly for entrepreneurs. We have great universities and academic institutions that are really committed to, you know, this idea of pivoting, providing skills enhancements, and retooling opportunities, not just for students, but also for entrepreneurs. And we reference the many grants and funding opportunities. I cannot emphasize enough that we need to be able to access these to support investment in R&D, using technology across all sectors, from small to medium-sized businesses, to really think about efficiencies and growth. And finally, you know, I have to share that we're extremely blessed to have the constant guidance of our beloved Imam, who is always sort of, you know, is ambitious for us, is watching our growth and our success very carefully. And it just reminds me, throughout our history, when I think about my parents, my grandparents, moving from India to Africa in very difficult circumstances, and then our own parents coming from Africa to Canada. And as a leader of the Jamaat, having the opportunity to hear, the Central Asian Jamaat story about their journey, leaving Central Asia, going to different countries in the world where they may not have the appropriate education or the context, and then coming to Canada. These are defining moments in our history, and it is the privilege that we have of being part of a community with the Imam's guidance that we have this notion of one Jamaat. And when we look at all of these circumstances, these defining moments, the Jamaat has really thrived. And I'm really excited, actually, to look forward to, in 10 years from now, to look back and say, COVID was a defining moment in our Jamaat. And look at how our Jamaat came together and thrived. So inshallah, really excited to see what that's going to look like.
No, agreed. Thank you, President Zahra. President Fawzia?
Well, those are pretty profound words. Not sure that I can add much to it. Look, first I want to say thank you, Ali, to you and EPB for putting together this webinar, and I sincerely hope that the Jamaat finds it useful. I think I would maybe leave three thoughts with you. The first one is remember you're not alone. We have an incredible Jamaat and amazing volunteers who live our values every single day. And the one that is top of mind is Jamaat helping the Jamaat. So reach out. We shared the access line. And as someone wise said, there's no shame in asking for help. It's actually courageous to know when you need it. So please reach out. The second thing that I would leave with you, and I think you heard a little bit about it, is there is a lot of opportunities out there, whether you're in the trades, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a professional. And the latest economic outlook is fairly bullish on Canada as well as Alberta. Now, it might be a bit later. So what does that mean? Well, let's get ready to take advantage. And remember, continuous learning. I had my kids one day say to me, look, Mom, can you learn a little bit of coding? It'll help you. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to learn coding. And there's free courses and webinars. And guess what? I was able to at least, figure out a little bit of it, maybe not become an expert. And I think Haji Imam has spoken about that, and where he said, in an age of accelerating change, when even the most sophisticated skills are quickly outdated, the most important skill anyone can learn is the ability to go on learning. And then last but not least, and again, you've heard this, it's about flexibility and adaptability. And again, I think the best way to close this is Imam Zaman in his December Talika said something along the lines, and I think it speaks really well to something President Zahra said about defining moments. And he said, from our historic tradition of facing adversity with unity, resolve, and resilience, I am convinced that my Jamaat will emerge from the present crisis with enhanced strength and capacities as we plan for the future. Now we have to believe that and do our part, and inshallah the rest will follow. Thank you so very much, Ali.
Well, thank you. I kind of got a bit of chills when you went through those last parts, because I do feel like there is so much to be thankful for. One, to be thankful for the three of you taking the time and effort to be with us today, to share some of the incredible thoughts and resources and ideas. No doubt there'll be many questions. No doubt there'll be a lot more to follow from this as we look at the future webinar series that are coming. If we look at all of the resources that the Jamaat has we've kind of identified in the Jamaat that's created for the Jamaat, right? I mean, this hashtag one Jamaat is such an important part. And so I guess in closing, I'd like to say, look, for people who have been watching this webinar, we've been posting links throughout. Thank you so much for your questions. I know there were some that we didn't get to, so we'll be able to try to follow up in different ways to ensure that people do get their questions answered. We have kind of posted and talked about the access line and the way to call. That number we've put out in the chat, it's 1-88-536-3599. We've talked about a bunch of resources today, and I hope that if nothing else, the one thing that everyone takes away from this is that there's something that every single person watching this webinar today can take away and do something about right away. So if we'd say just please pick up your pen, pick up your thought process, but don't just sit idle. It's, as President Fauzi said, we got to prepare, we got to get ready. And how will each of you be ready to take advantage? How will you be preparing your families to take advantage? How will you help prepare the Jamaat? And we're hoping to be here to hold your hand as you do that. Thank you very much for your time. And inshallah, we'll get to see you on many more webinars in the future. Thank you, everyone. Ya Ali Madad.